Support comes from Hampton Roads Community Foundation, partnering with donors from all walks of life to improve southeastern Virginia through grants, scholarships, and leadership initiatives. Learn more at hamptonroadscf.org.
Hello, everyone. I'm Barbara Ham-Lee. Regardless of your political affiliation, if you watched the ceremonial roll call of states at this week's Democratic National Convention, you could not help but get caught up in the club atmosphere. A DJ, music, politicians, celebrities. It was a party. But will all of this enthusiasm carry over to the polls? And what exactly is Project 2025? And how will it impact the Black community should the Republican candidate be elected president? Political analyst Dr. Eric Claville with a Claville report. That's coming up next, right after this news from NPR and WHRO News.
Discussing today's topics from an African-American perspective, this is Another View.
Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to Another View. I'm Barbara Ham-Lee. Lots to unpack with political analyst Dr. Eric Claville, but we begin today's show with a tribute. 1 week ago, WHRO lost a member of our family, former WFOS announcer Jerry Carter. Jerry had a way with words and a profound knowledge of the music he played, two things his listeners admired and appreciated. In fact, it was just 2 years ago that the Virginia Association of Broadcasters named Jerry Carter Best Radio Personality. Our Lisa Godley looks at Jerry Carter's life and the career he loved.
For more than 50 years, Jerry Carter used his sultry voice and smooth delivery to engage listeners wherever the radio frequency would reach.
I'm Jerry Carter, your host here of the Blues Traffic Jam on 88.7 WFOS, the station where the blues comes out to play each and every day.
Born Clarence A. Hamler, Jr., Jerry grew up in Roanoke, Virginia. Back in July of last year, he told Another View's Barbara Ham-Lee that one night he turned on the radio and couldn't turn it off. He was 10 years old at the time. He went on to share that his big break came in March of 1972 when he was working at night for a janitorial service to earn money for college. The place he was cleaning, a radio station.
At nighttime, I would come in and turn on the turntables, not realizing that I was also turning on the transmitter.
While you were cleaning?
I would play some music.
Oh!
I would play Steam, Na Na, Hey Na Na, Kiss 'Em Goodbye, Moonlight Feels Right, and then come back behind that with James Brown or some Motown. I didn't know about formats. It was 10 o'clock at night, and I'm in there going, hey, baby, Dr. Soul bringing you the gold.
Jerry says at night, he would take phone calls from listeners as far away as Canada and taking requests.
Willie Dixon wrote that song, Coco Taylor, and Willie Dixon sang that song, Wang Dang Doodle. It's Thursday, and we throwing it back at you. It's yours now, baby. You do what you want to do. Yeah.
Jerry was enjoying every minute of it. After about a week, he was called to the boss's office.
I sat down. He says, I got two things for you, good news and bad news. What do you want first? I said, give me the bad news, Barry. You're fired. And then his wife came in. Did Which caller tell you that you're going to be our new morning man? I said, I'm not coming in here early in the morning to vacuum anymore. She said, oh, no, you're not the janitor anymore. We're going to let you start off at middays, and then we're going to make you the morning man. We're going to hire you to be a radio announcer. And wow. I couldn't believe it.
This was the beginning of a career that would span 5 decades.
It's been a rough week, and now it's time to relax and take it easy.
Throughout his career, Jerry would learn enough about the industry to help build 4 radio stations from the ground up.
I don't want any accolades. I'm a public servant. I'm a social worker. The days that I'm not on the air, I'm thinking somebody needs to talk to me.
Jerry Carter passed away on Thursday, August 15th. He was 77. For Another View, I'm Lisa Godley.
A celebration of life for Jerry will be held this Saturday at 2 p.m. in the Hamler Curtis Chapel of the Hamler Curtis Funeral Home and Crematory in Roanoke, Virginia. The family will receive friends 1 hour prior to the service, and live streaming will be available from the Hamlin Curtis website. And on behalf of the Another View crew, we extend our sincere condolences. We'll be right back. Political analyst Dr. Eric Claville has been paying attention to this week's Democratic National Convention, and he's been engaged in community conversations within the African American community about Project 2025, the conservative blueprint for governing the nation should the Republican candidate for president be elected. And he is here, as always, to bring us the award-winning Claville report. How you doing, Eric?
I'm doing good, my sister. Thank you so much for having me.
Oh, absolutely, because I always want your perspective on what's happening. So the question I asked during the tease, will this excitement that's been going on this week, and it's been exciting, carry over to the polls? Yeah. What do you think?
Enthusiasm, excitement, expectation, and every adjective that you can attach to it, joy, you heard that word, over and over again, is there. And usually at conventions, you do have that. And the question, will it translate to votes? Well, we will have to see, because it starts with grassroots organizing. And really, when you look at it, there's a short time period in order to make this happen. I think it's 75 days after today, right? Mm-hmm. So 75 days after today, we're going to elect the new president of the United States, all right? So when we look at that, the groundwork, they're going to hit it very hard. You're going to see a lot of people on the ground, especially in battleground states, and we'll talk more about the significance of battleground states as it relates to this election. And you're going to see a lot of zigzagging across the country. So this race is very tight, and even after this election, you heard various speakers talk about, listen, this is great, we see it, but keep in mind, we've seen this before, and we got another result, right, in 2016. So I've looked at it, and we'll talk about the factors and the variables that I'm looking at toward the end of the show. But I believe this race is still very tight. But whoever wins this election, I believe that they're going to win all of the, if not most of the battleground states and win this election. So
one of the things that the goal of the DNC is to introduce Kamala Harris and Tim Walz to America.
Yes.
Are they doing a good job with that? And when is it time to start talking about policy?
Yeah. Well, first, I think they're doing a great job. I think that across the board, the speeches have been phenomenal. That they sent Joe off, and it was a great speech, and Joe was like that grandfather, laying it out.
And even throughout each night, they, somebody brings it up again, and the crowd starts, chanting, thank you, Joe.
Absolutely. And again, they're submitting his legacy, which is what they said they would do, and they should do, because he has been, if we look at policy and where we were several years ago and where we are now and headed across the board from health to the economy, education, and the like, he's going to go down as one of the best presidents we've had in our generation when we take a look at it. Stabilizing the country after 5 years of former President Trump, the world pandemic. He's going to go down as one of the great presidents that we've had. And then when you take a look at moving forward, the next day, with the Obamas, who were the now they are the bearers of the flag of the Democratic Party. We look at the family, the first family of the Democratic Party. The Clintons, you can see them now also selling out. We talked about it before. Jesse Jackson opened up the convention. He has Parkinson's. He did not say anything. But you can see the passing of the torch.
So you see the generations are changing there.
Absolutely. And then, look, we talked about, just as a side note, we talked about Michelle and Barack in their speeches. And child, let me tell you, Barack should win first. Because Michelle, she tore that thing up.
Exactly. You know what? And as a matter of fact, he admitted, you know what? I'm the only one stupid enough to go behind Michelle Obama. But her speech was so powerful.
It was. You could tell that she was finally free. She was released from being, it's what she called that fishbowl of the White House, where she had to play a role. I mean, when you're in that role, when you're in that box, I mean, it's a big box. It's a very high-profile box. It's a very privileged box. Not too many people, only 47 in families, 46 have had
46,
an opportunity to do it.
Exactly.
Right?
Yeah.
So in the history of the country. So it's a very privileged box, but it's also a restraining box. But she was free. And she talked about the passing of her mother. Of course, her father had passed prior. And she talked her heart. At the same time, she also spoke to a lot of the hearts of Black people and experiences of first generation, college and people and so forth and so on. And it was very moving. It was also very powerful. It was very entertaining.
Yes.
Both of them were. Barack is very, professorial. I love listening to him speak, and he really laid out some things in his way. But Michelle, look, she brought it to the house.
So tonight, Vice President Harris will formally accept the nomination.
Yes.
What do you expect to hear from her?
Well, I expect her to introduce herself again, to the country. This is who I am. I was the head, attorney, district attorney for the Bay Area. I was the state attorney general. Then I'm a U.S. senator and vice president. But now I'm stepping from behind that podium of vice president, stepping in front of the podium to be the nominee, to be now the flag bearer of the Democratic Party. So I think she's going to tell her story again, because I think a lot of people, of course, there's been a lot of misinformation starting about her, starting at, the NABJ with the former president, that interview, which I think was a total debacle, but we'll talk about that later, hopefully, or maybe not, but she'll tell her story, her family, who she is, where she comes from, and what she's doing now. But I think she also has to lay out what she believes is the pathway for the country. She's got to talk some policy, not really delve into it. You can't really do that because it's a short time period, but you have to talk, your outline of your policy. You have to give an outline. Joy is good. Hope is good. That's great. But what are the policies? If I was advising her, I would say that the policies would be continuing the Biden-Harris agenda, right? Because now,
specifically with what?
I think across the board. Okay. When you look at the economy, you look at education, you look at, there's one area that she's going to have issues with, and that's international. Because right now, when you take a look, immigration, the border, it's a mess. It really is. The policies are. In addition to that, but that's also a construct of both sides, right? Because when there was
they did have a plan and it was sunk, and so she has said publicly that she will come back and bring that policy back and implement it this time.
Right, and it was sunk by the Republican majority when Trump was in office, and then after during this time period. So it is a construct of both parties, and then again one to get a foot above the other. But also the conflicts that we have in the Middle East, which is a hotbed issue, Eastern Europe with Russia and Ukraine, which Russia and Ukraine is so out there. People really don't think about it. I mean, the average person, we're across from university here at WHRO, and if you go walk and say, can you pick out Ukraine on the map? I guarantee you.
They couldn't do it.
Right. So that's how people really are so far removed from the conflict. And we know Russia, we know the Soviet Union, we know the Cold War axis of evil, but right now modern America doesn't know. But what they do see is what's happening in Gaza and also what's happening in Israel. So we see that, and that's always constant now in the news. So with that being the case, that's where everybody's focus is.
Eric, do you think people are paying attention? To the average Joe and Joe and
Jolene,
Joy and
right?
Jolene, whoever, right? But the average person, are they paying attention? Are they watching? I'm a news junkie. I'm watching every night. But are people watching? Are they listening? Are they at a point now where they're starting to really decide which direction they're going to go?
I think that people who are locked into this historic nomination and locked into this, they are. And I think entertainment is Hollywood, because you hear it on the talk shows, late night talk shows, you see it on the news and so forth. Outside of that, the answer is no. They're not, and it's not because it's not reaching them from different areas, but it's just it's really meant to get the party going, right? Now, of course, when Obama was the nominee, I mean, that was majorly historic. So a lot of people were watching that across the board. And it's like, we've seen this before. We've seen a woman be nominated before, right? So we've seen a woman be nominated for vice president before, on the Republican side. So we've seen this before. So I don't think it's really grabbing people like it did the last couple of cycles. We had the first African-American black man, and then, of course, the first woman.
How well has the Republican Party done in counter-programming?
They were called flat-footed, hands down, and they're really bitter about that too, rightfully so. But what happened is that, keep in mind, you had the attempted assassination survival. He survived that. You see the fist up in the air. And I was interviewed by one of the local stations here when giving analysis on it. And I said, that's what you're going to see on T-shirts, across the board. That's the iconic moment for them.
When he said fight, fight, fight.
Yeah, fight. The fist is up. He's got blood dripping. I mean, what better, optic for a fighter, your champion, right? And then you have the RNC. And, kind of flat, but it was exciting for the supporters, right, that are there. And I also thought that the RNC had, with J.D. Vance and his mother being, now clean after being addicted to opioids, I think it showed everyday white Americans, more specifically, and people that are dealing with real issues. Because usually you have individuals that are kind of privileged, right, across the board. Kids went to private school, that type of thing. But they showed real people. Same thing with yesterday with Tim Walz. They showed his son, who struggles from learning disability and so forth, but they showed
he was so excited.
He was. He
was so excited.
But it was a great moment for both sides, the RNC with J.D. Vance's mother, Tim Walz with his son, because it showed it showed humanity, across the board, what people deal with. And I think people really connected with those moments. But back to the RNC, they didn't get, unfortunately for them, they didn't get the convention bump, because after it was over, guess what happened on Sunday? Yeah,
I believe that's when the president decided he was no longer running.
That's when Joe Biden said, "I'm not running," endorsing Harris. My phone's blowing up. Everybody's phone's blowing up.
Yes.
And they're like, "Hey, this is historic, right?" We knew it. I knew that it had to happen, but when they did it, it was really masterful, because it took the steam out of their engine. It took the wind from their sail, and they haven't been able to recover since. I mean, they've been struggling to capture the news cycle, because it's been Harris news cycle. Now, when we see what's going to happen with this bump, we'll see what happens, but I believe what they're doing is planning something similar to where RFK Jr. is going to suspend his campaign. Well, people say suspend now since John McCain. He's going to end his campaign. It's over. It was really over before it started. But what he's doing is he's actually going to give his support, we believe, for Trump and campaign on his behalf.
How many people were supporting him? I mean, percentage-wise, and how much of a bump then would that be for Donald Trump?
At the highest point in his support, you had about 11% across the country, and also battleground states more specifically. After the conventions, you see now up to this point, I looked at the numbers as of yesterday, it showed 4 to 5% max, where he has that support. Now that's significant, because what you see now is you see that percentage of people, let's just say 3% of that 5 goes to Trump. That brings the race back even. That 1% more puts him ahead. there are going to be some precincts where a few hundreds of votes are going to win that precinct, which translates to a few thousand votes that's going to win that locality, which translates to less than 10,000 votes is going to win that state, right?
Wow. So this is going to be very, very close.
It is. Absolutely. But again, I believe that whoever wins this election, they're going to win, if not most of the battleground states.
So you're going to make a prediction towards the end of the show. Okay,
Right.
We'll talk about that.
Yes.
And so in the meantime, as we look at what's happening with Donald Trump and his ability or inability to stay focused on policy as opposed to name calling and so forth. But Project 25, well, Agenda 47,
Right.
and then Project 2025. First, explain for our listeners what the difference is between Project 47 and Project 2025.
Right. So Agenda 47 is the actual platform that the president has outlined, the former President Trump, nominated the Republican Party, outlined for his agenda when taking office. Very similar to what every politician outlines as what they're doing.
So when you go to their website, this is what they stand for. This is what they would do if they got in office.
Absolutely.
Okay.
So for all the listeners out there, I want you to simply go to donaldjtrump.com and you'll see Agenda 47. Just click on it, or you can Google it or put it in any search engine that you have, Agenda 47. And of course, the 47 is a play on the 47th president, right, who will be the next person that will serve. And agenda is just simply his outline for it. So when we take a look at this, it's basically a lot of things that are, it's a lot of stump ground promises, For example, the very first thing is seal the border and stop, migrant invasions, All right, great. How are you going to do that? Of course, number 2 is carry out the largest deportation operation in American history. He's going to end inflation and make America affordable again. Okay. How are you going to do that? The feds, they're working on that now. Make America the dominant energy producer in the world by far. Stop outsourcing. Large tax cuts for workers and no tax on tips. Defend the Constitution. Now, this is key because you're talking about defend the Constitution and freedoms. It's all the freedoms that are outlined, including freedom to bear arms. Prevent World War III and restore peace in Europe and the Middle East and build a great Iron Dome missile defense shield over the entire country, all made in America. And it goes on and on. End the weaponizing of government against the American people. And that's significant because when we take a look now at Project 2025, we're going to see how the conservative think tank, their playbook for the next conservative president, how they actually do that. Rebuilding cities, and the list goes on and on and on. Another thing, when you take a look at culture wars, it says keep men out of women's sports, right? And that goes
towards the transgender community.
Exactly. Securing elections. So you look at election security, quote unquote, and election fraud, quote unquote, including same-day voting, voting ID, paper ballots, and proof of citizenship. So all this is an attack upon making elections or making the ballot box more accessible in states, which is where, again, the Republican Party has been losing. And lastly, unite our country by bringing it to new and record levels of success. All right, what does that mean? At the end of the day, one last thing, and this is a take on DEI and the woke movement, as it's called on the other side. Cut federal funding for any school pushing critical race theory, radical gender ideology, and other inappropriate racial, sexual, or political content on our children. All right, that is extremely broad. However, all of this speaks to a culture war. All this speaks to an America that is gone, and you really can't bring it back. When we talk about, we're looking at the optics of the two conventions. If you look at the DNC, you look at really
lots of diversity in the
lots
world.
of diversity, representation of not just America, but a representation of the world, because America is the largest melting pot experiment in the world, so far. So you have that. On the RNC side, you see mostly white Americans there. You see some sprinkles of people of color, and you also see a very similar age demographic as well with the RNC, right? And they're not getting younger; they're getting older, and they're phasing out. Whereas the DNC, they're getting much younger, and they're bringing people in. Now, with a big tent, you have a lot of issues, a lot of agendas, and people are competing. Under a smaller tent, you're narrowly focused on certain issues, and that could be an advantage as well. And that's what we see when we talk about Donald Trump's Agenda 47. So that's his agenda, day one, when he's in office, of what he said he wants
to do. Before we get into then transposing to 2025, if you're just joining us, our guest today is award-winning political analyst Dr. Eric Claville with the Claville Report on the race to the White House. What questions do you have about Project 2025? Give us a call, 757-440-2665 or 1-800-940-2240. We will try our best to give you the facts. Correct, right?
Absolutely.
So when I tease this as looking at how this will impact the African American community in particular, but whatever happens to the Black community from Project 2025 really happens to everybody.
Absolutely.
So I want the audience to understand that while we're looking at it through a lens of the Black community, this really is about what the implementation would look like.
Absolutely.
Of Mr. Trump's plan, should he be elected?
Right. Now, should he decide to be elected?
Yeah, exactly. Should he decide to be elected?
Right.
Yes, but should he be elected?
Should he be elected? So, so Barbara, I think that is a phenomenal segue into discussing what Project 2025 is. So, Project 2025 is actually we talk about think tanks, and I was fortunate enough to be the the first director of a think tank, Center for African American Public Policy at Norfolk State. And what think tanks do is that they actually are the ones that do the work that create the ideas for elected officials to present in bills and to become law or policies that are enacted across agencies. That's how law is made, right? Politicians are like, listen, don't take anything away from them because I respect all people that run for office. But really what they are is it's like running for high school, prom and king and queen and across the board. I mean, that's you're basically selling an image with a message, but the substance of the message comes through policy, right? So the Heritage Foundation, which is a conservative think tank, which was started right after the Nixon administration around that time period, funded by people like the Coors family, and then initially creating a think tank for conservatism, right? But the Nixon type conservatism. So you have people from the Nixon administration that actually came across to help start it. Since that time period, it's grown tremendously and become the leading conservative think tank really in Washington. You have others, and they have a coalition of people, and we'll talk about that in just a moment. But, that's what they are. Around 1972, it began. Now, there were people that were in the Trump administration in 2016, 2020 that then came over to the Heritage Foundation and created this roadmap, this policy agenda, this playbook for the next conservative president, right? So now this is nothing different from what the playbook that was created to get most conservative judges and justices on our federal courts, from the district court to the circuit court to the highest court.
So they came up with the plan on how to make that happen.
The plan.
Okay.
And the playbook. The playbook. The plan, the playbook, and then also what can transpire from that. Okay. So Project 2025, and for all our listeners, you can go to project2025.org. That's project2025.org, or you can put it into any search engine that you like. But when you click on it, it tells you up front. It says building for conservative victory through policy, personnel, and training. Policy, personnel, and training. These are the pillars of this agenda. And the reason why...
Go ahead. No, because I was going to say they even go so far as to provide a list of people who could become employed by the federal government in order to implement this. I mean, it's very detailed.
Very detailed, very bold agenda, and it's right there. One thing I've done several of these forums about Project 2025 just in the last month, and we'll be doing another, and we'll be doing a lot more up until the election and probably afterwards as well. But one thing that I find, I get the question, what do you find surprising about this? One thing I find is that they're putting it out there. It's in your face. It is right there. We had it actually printed out in one form, and you saw people holding it up at the DNC, but we actually printed out, it was 2 huge binders.
It's over 900 pages.
Over 900 pages, right?
Wow.
And but what it does is it gives you everything. But another colleague of mine stated, matter of fact, it was Congressman Bobby Scott, he said, what is it that they're saying that, what is that surprises you? It says not what they're saying, but it's what they're not saying. That's right. Actually, it was Senator Louise Lucas that said that made that statement. It's actually what they're not saying. If this is what they're telling you, then what are they not telling you, right? So the pillars: policy, personnel, training, and 180-day playbook. So the reason why policy is so important, because policy is the way that our lives are dictated, the way that our lives are pretty much, I hate to say the word, but rule, right? They set the rules, and you have to abide by them. That's why elections do have consequences, because those that win the election, they're able to create the policy in which dictates our lives.
Well, one of the things about Project 2025 also is that the policies that they, some of them, not all of them, but some of them, they would move to a position where it does not have to be legislated and becoming a law, but that the executive branch would actually have the power to put it into place, to implement it.
Right. As a matter of fact, what the policy does is specifically proposes major changes to federal agencies. And federal agencies are the arms of our government that actually implement the policy, and that's how things tend to happen. When you go to, you're employed somewhere, they give you what? A policy manual.
Yes.
You have the job.
Here's the rules.
Here are the rules. This is how we govern ourselves. And those rules are congruent. Those policies are congruent with the law of the state where you are, that jurisdiction. Of course, they're also congruent with the federal government, and they're also congruent with the Constitution and any statutes that are passed by Congress. Now, statutes passed by Congress makes laws. You guys remember the, Saturday morning.
am a bill.
I'm a bill. Just bill sitting on Capitol Hill.
Yes.
So, however, it would literally wipe that out, and it would consolidate power under pretty much the president at that time period. And let's go to personnel. When we talk about personnel, which is the second pillar of Project 2025, it would basically eliminate the federal protections of employees that would be hired as federal employees, and they would actually put them under the executive branch and make them loyal to whomever is president, so that they can be fired or removed if they do not implement the agenda that's given to them, and possibly prosecuted as well through the courts. So this sounds very similar to his hero, Vladimir Putin, who was the, I think, president now of Russia. I know he's prime minister, but president for life. So this is also very similar to President Xi in China. So you see how the world is going, right? And this is what this particular group says should happen as well. With that, you also have, in order to make sure that this is a very viable, well, before I get to that, because I want to talk about the coalition that they have, but also training. So you have training that would take place in order to train these individuals under this new model, to say this is how we now implement policies across the federal agencies. Now, we've done this for hundreds of years. I mean, federal agencies, we have trainings, they have trainings all the time, even our organizations, but they would be trained for a specific purpose. And then the 180-day playbook this is what we're going to do in 180 days. That massive. Now, what is significant about 180 days? That's 6 months, right? What is significant about 180 days in the presidential cycle is that after that first 6 months, you then start. That's when you have the most power to make changes, because then you have another 18 months because you got midterm elections.
Because you got right. Exactly.
So midterm elections are coming up, so you can't really move too far left or too far right because you may endanger your advantage that you have in the House or the Senate. So that's why midterm elections are very important, and also across the states. Just like here, after the presidential election in 2024 in the Commonwealth of Virginia, the gubernatorial election, right, in 2025, right? So you can't endanger that across the board.
Are there? And that's, you bring up a really good point, because I've read a lot of the different things that they would want to implement in terms of policy and so forth. I don't see anything about control of the Senate and the House.
Right. I mean, well, they're separate branches, right? But what you would do is you would limit their ability to make laws and laws that would be...
So there still would be an impact.
Absolutely. Impact across the board. Let me just mention a few. If you go to project2025.org and you click on the area where it says Presidential Personnel Database, right? Mm-hmm. So now you have a database of individuals that you can actually sign up and see if you can be selected to serve in this administration. But you click on the advisory board. You have an advisory board. You have groups such as the American Accountability Foundation. You have the Alabama Policy Institute, because it's statewide. You have the American Compass, American Cornerstone Institute, Faith, Liberty, Community, and Life. The American Conservative. You go across, it goes across the country. You have also Concerned Women for America, the Conservative Caucus, the Conservative Partnership Institute. And of course, you have things around family. We have institutes where you have Mississippi and across in Alabama, the James Madison Institute, and Liberty University is also a part of this advisory board as well, from a university standpoint. Mississippi Center for Public Policy, and the like.
So, Eric, what are some of the policies? Just give us a couple of examples that would definitely impact the African American community, even maybe disproportionately than to other communities out of this plan, if it were to be implemented.
Now, look, I'll give you one that would be devastating. They want to abolish the they want to abolish the Department of Education.
That would be devastating.
Abolishing the Department of Education, which was started, right? It's probably one of the newest legacy agencies that we have, but it was really started because of states' rights and segregation in schools, and not appropriating funds fairly to public schools where you had schools that were segregated. So, and now they've played a major part also in university funding, in policies across the board. So the U.S. Department of Education, if you abolish that, now you kick learning back to the states, and they can just do whatever they want. And that's really, going back to states' rights.
And also, one of their policies is also to strengthen the ability of people within the states to utilize public monies to go to any school. So It could be private, public, religious, doesn't matter.
So exactly, Barbara. And I'm glad you brought that up, because now what you're doing, you're taking taxpayer money, giving it to private schools that are not bound by federal guidelines, or federal, they can do whatever they want to do. Very similar to vouchers. People say the vouchers are good, and they have the good points, bad points. But one thing about the schools, they don't have to accommodate you. If they think that you're being disruptive to their standards, they can expel you, and you're done. But they got the money.
But it's really interesting also, because they also talk about eliminating things like Head Start.
Yes.
And you're looking at the education of a people, of a group of people, that if they do not have access to education, then that causes a major problem in terms of their growth and success within the society.
Absolutely. When we talk about Head Start is such a phenomenal program, and it should be expanded, because all studies show when you start educating children earlier, you get a better Head Start in grade school, and just a better society across the board. However, that's not what this agenda wants. It wants pretty much robots, people that don't want you to think. They don't want you to think, because once persons start to think, now you create a real democracy. And this is not what this proposes to be. Another area is real quick, EPA. So they want to limit the regulations of the EPA. Keep in mind the impact of the EPA, Environmental Protection Agency. I call them protectionisms, because without protectionisms, companies will still be dumping mercury in our oceans, right? Which is why we have high levels of mercury in our oceans. Pollution would be at a at a rate that would cause
and a lot of the communities that
where
they dump things and pollutants and so forth are minority communities,
black communities, poor communities, absolutely, hands down, and that's the impact. I mean, just right here in Norfolk, when you talk about
Lambert Point,
when you talk about resilience for flooding, I mean, look, we get a hard rain. There are some communities like around here, but in a lot of poor communities, you're being flooded. And so taking away those protections and limiting those protectionisms will impact and harm black communities across the board.
So when at NEBJ there was a big workshop and discussion about this, and one of the quotes that came out of that was that talking about the conservative movement, their biggest weapon against us is our belief that it can't happen.
Yes.
Are people paying attention?
No, they're not. I get asked all the time, what is Project 2025? But you hear it. That's why there's so much now a push for people to really understand what's out there. Listen, policy is the nuts and bolts of politics. That's something I love it. Like I said, I've talked about it all the time. My graduate degree, my post, doctorate degree is in library and information science, So I just love the library, love museum, love history. I just love to peel it back and see it. That's an anomaly, right? Most people aren't like that because you just don't have time to do it or that's not your thing. But policy is the most important part of government. The law and policy, that's it.
So, Eric, why then is Trump distancing, can't speak today, himself from Project 2025?
It's not popular. I mean, it also is really bad thing, right? Because again, when you talk about some of the proposals, gutting abortion access, and we talk about women's rights to choose, mass deportations, abusing warrantless surveillance, unleashing undue force on protesters. Severely limiting voting access. That's another thing. We talked about that in Agenda 47. Censoring critical discussions in classroom. Critical race theory, as it's called. Rolling back rights for all individuals. I mean, when you talk about it being unpopular, that is something that people just don't want to see happen. So it's kind of like when you give persons, you say, oh, you know how to read now. And you say, no, you can't read. No. We reading is freedom, and being able to operate in America is freedom. Of course, there has to be respects across the board, with everybody else's freedoms and respect their beliefs. But at the same time, what Project 2025 does, because what's happening. Remember, we talked about the large tent, the smaller tent. You're not expanding that smaller tent because of the focus of what that tent is, right? It's a small tent for a reason. So if I can't win with the people that I have, I can create the rules to give me an advantage to win.
Do you think, I know this is going to be a controversial question, but I'm going to ask it anyway.
Go right ahead.
If this were to be implemented, is this, and ideas like this going forward, an opportunity or another way for America to become like South Africa was, an apartheid where the minority rules the majority?
Yes.
And is that the direction that they're trying to take the country? Is this that last grasp?
Yes.
Because the demographics are changing and the way we're doing things are changing.
That is correct. Again, look at the small tent, look at the big tent, look at the optics of the small tent, look at the optics, the demographics, the people in those two tents when you look at the RNC and the DNC. So again, there's this belief that people believe America should be a certain way and stay that way. And they have the right. First of all, you have the right to believe whatever you want, and if you can find
that's the beauty of America.
That's the beauty of America. So hands down, you have the right to do that. And if you want to run on that, you have the right to run for an election. And if you win, so be it. But elections have consequences, right? So you have that group that says we want to make sure that the clock goes back or stays in a certain way. I mentioned the courts. The Democratic Party, they actually lost on the courts because they were asleep at the wheel. What Mitch McConnell was able to do, not just with the Supreme Court, we see that.
Yeah.
But with
the lower federal courts.
Lower federal courts. Oh my God. I mean, that is really the backstop with a lot of these things. Clarence Thomas wrote the dicta. The dicta is like an opinion, but it's not controlling, right? It's influential. But he wrote the dicta that the federal judge in Florida used to dismiss the documents case in Trump's trial in Florida. I mean, think about that. Now, it really didn't have any legal backing for the most part. It was really opinion, but because it comes from the court, it becomes the power of law, and that was used. It's going to go up to the federal court. Now, they got to deal with it in the circuit court.
Wow.
That circuit may or may make it out. I think it will. But when it goes to the Supreme Court, he's going to win that because of what was written in the dicta of the case and used in the federal court.
And now you and I are the nerds because we are into this,
yes.
right? In terms of what's watching and so forth. But will this plan or any other plan that is not well-meaning for the majority of the country finally start to make a difference when it does what? Hits people in their pocketbook or hits people in their ability to function on a daily basis?
I think both. But at the same time, the belief of this particular policy, I mean, this is not a good, when you talk about policy, and I'm being as objective as possible, this is not good policy because it's so restrictive and it goes against our Constitution and our democracy, right? Just on paper, right? When you implement this, to your point, people start to say, wait a minute, you mean I can't do this? Right. I was able to do this. And so restrictions of freedoms start to have people to look and say, wait a minute, something's wrong. But that's where we're headed. So it's really to keep a certain group and a certain value system in check. Remember, they floated the idea about, I would say, Barbara, probably it was 15 years ago. I remember because it was a group back in Baton Rouge that actually did it. I forget the gentleman's name over the family group, but he said we should split into two Americas. One conservative America and one liberal America. He said that's really where we're going because of the values that they saw that popular society was moving toward. So still, that belief of splitting the country from the Civil War is still alive and out there. And Project 2025 shows that.
If it happened, I mean, are there backstops? Is there a way to, if everybody suddenly woke up and realized that there was a direction that we were going that they did not want to go, do we still have protections to make sure it doesn't happen?
Yeah. Vote. Vote, hands down, you have to vote. And that's the only way to vote to put people in that's going to continue to keep democracy going. Now, with everything that happens in our democracy, do you agree with it? No, I don't agree with it. But it gives us a fair opportunity to actually talk about it, debate it, and then come to a compromise where all persons can actually function. And that's really what America is. When you start to go this route, we start to become like China, we start to become like Russia, and to your point, South Africa.
Yeah. So we only got less than 5 minutes. We got 4 minutes left. Your prediction, sir.
Yes.
What are you looking at?
So prior to Trump-Harris, I was adamant that, Trump would beat Biden in this election in the event that it stayed that way. After the convention, I was even more so convinced. I mean, after the debate, I was even more so convinced. And also looking at the factors are that person was not excited. And we didn't have those extra factors, those extenuating circumstances of the pandemic and watching Trump for 5 years, just basically, put our country in jeopardy and really the world. So we didn't have that again because things are okay. Things are good. So I'm not talking through a mask. You're not talking through a mask.
Right.
And, people are okay. So I had Trump because he was leading in 5 of the 7 battleground states easily. So I had him beating Biden.
This was prior to Biden stepping down.
Yes.
Okay. All right.
So now it's a total reset. And this race, I've talked about it before on various news stations. This race now becomes even, right? And you see where Harris is leading in some states within the margin of error. So it flipped. But I'm waiting to see several factors before I make a final prediction on this election, this reset. One, look and see what happens after the DNC bump, and also RFK Jr. makes this announcement, if it's going to go as we think it is. Secondly, I'm waiting to see what happens in this debate that's coming up. You got a vice presidential debate, and you have the only debate between Harris and Trump. This is also going to be her opportunity to show men and women that don't believe that a woman should be in that position that she is competent, confident, and can lead America. Because, as I mentioned to you, I've had conversations with a lot of people, and a lot of men ask me, "Hey, do you really think she could do the job?" Still today,
we're still dealing with that. Yeah,
absolutely. You got a vice presidential debate. In addition to that, I'm waiting to see what happens with the ceasefire in Gaza. Because if there's not a ceasefire up until the election and there's an all-out assault, that puts the Biden administration and Harris at the forefront to answer. And at the end of the day, when you talk about Israel and Middle East, Republicans win on that all day, every day because of the strength that they show behind it and so forth. So the other factor is what happens with the economy. I think we're going to be good for the economy. And around election time, gas stays low, economy stays good, right? But lastly, immigration. Will something rear its ugly head?
That October surprise.
That October surprise. So, will that October surprise be an attack, foreign or on, or domestically? Will that October surprise be a big announcement, which I don't think there are any skeletons in the closet anywhere. If it was, it would have come out by now. But I'm really looking at that. But when you bring me back in October, I'll make the final prediction then.
In October. Eric, it is always, always, always a pleasure. So did you party during the roll call?
Well, you know what? Hats off. It was so good to see Congressman Bobby Scott.
Yes, that was very, very good. Yeah. And Senator Mark Warner. And Louise Lucas was in the background.
Louise Lucas in the background. Senator Mamie Lodge. Congresswoman Jennifer McClellan. Virginia was well represented there. It was so good to see everybody. So it was great. But I did party this past week, and I want to give a shout out to my two boys. Ethan Claville, who's a freshman at Virginia State, turned 18 on Sunday. And our oldest son, Ian Sebastian Claville, who's the drum major at Howard University, turns 21 today. So happy birthday,
guys. Happy birthday. We really appreciate that. Eric, as always, thank you so much.
Thank you.
And audience, before we let you go, let me tell you that Pastor Eric Crawley presents The Hotel Lobby, a stage play. And this is happening on Saturday, August the 24th at 6 p.m. at Kings Fork High School. Now, it says, come join us for a night of drama, comedy, and entertainment at our live stage play event. Get ready to be immersed in the captivating story unfolding right before your eyes. Witness two hotel owners' unconventional ways of saving a marriage. Maybe. Sounds interesting. Tickets are available at the door. It's at Kings Fork High School this Saturday. Come on out, take your family and your friends, and I'm sure you will have a great time. And I want to thank you all, as always, for listening to this edition of Another View. You can find all of our programs at anotherviewradio.org, Spotify, or anywhere you go for your podcast listening pleasure. Next week on Another View on Health, Mental Health and the African American Community with cardiologist Dr. Keith Newby. Our theme music is an original composition created especially for Another View by Jay Sennett. Today's program was produced by our Another View intern, Selena Harris, under the supervision of show producer Lisa Godley. Selena is entering her sophomore year at Virginia Commonwealth University, and we wish her all the very best. Jordan Christie is our audio engineer, and Dr. Barry Graham handles our phones. I'm Barbara Ham-Lee. Have you made your plans to get to the polls to vote? If not, it's time to get busy. Have a great weekend, everybody, and let's get together again next Thursday at noon for Another View.
Support comes from Hampton Roads Community Foundation, carrying out your charitable wishes forever, whether it's helping shelter animals, feeding the homeless, enhancing the arts, or supporting students. Learn more at leaveabequest.org.